p.m. on March 18th, and the City Council work session will now come to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Renee, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Frank Bangard.
Present.
Councilmember Lloyd Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Kim Shaw Elliott.
Present.
Mayor Dave Gaddis.
Here.
City Manager Kyle Riefler.
Here.
City Attorney Randy Mora.
Present.
Thank you, Renee. All right, we'll get right to it. This is Code Review, Chapter 94. City Manager Riefler, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to pass it along to Louis Cerna. This is the Chapter 94 zoning chapter. It's a rather large chapter that covers a lot of the rest of the code of ordinances. So we figured that addressing the different points of this chapter will help us down the road to get things arranged as we go through the remainder. So, Louis.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Chapter 94, zoning, is a long chapter. There's a lot to it. I think we'll do this like we did the last one. If that's the way you want to go through this, we'll just go through the sections. And we've been taking a lot of notes, and I'd be glad to answer any of your questions. First section, first article is Article 1 in general, and this does include the definitions and the sections that are on the screen before you. Including landscape requirements. Be glad to answer any of your questions on this or take any of your comments.
Okay, are you asking us to comment on the table of contents?
Well, if you've gone through what's in the section, I can walk you through what's up through some of this and give you, our observations. If you like. I just wasn't sure if you had a chance to go through. But yeah, I can go through that.
No, it's fine. I wasn't sure what you were asking us, what the question was. But let me address the council right quick. Did everyone have the opportunity to go through all of Chapter 94? Okay.
Yes.
And did you pull out some items that you thought were important that you would like to change? All right. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
I think so. That's sort of what the way it worked out at the previous workshop, and I think it worked out well. And you don't want to hear me read all of this, I hope so.
No, it's not necessary. Okay, so yes, Mr. Roberts.
I was just going to recommend, like I had talked about the previous time we met, that I don't think anybody knows or understands what most of the issues are with our citizens more than our city manager. So, Kyle, it might be appropriate if you could kind of go through and let us know what you get the most phone calls about or challenges about or complaints about that really come to the forefront.
Sure. Should take all day. Well, hold on one second. Before you do that, because your list is probably not going to be the same as ours, I actually picked out 4 items. Did everybody do that? Did you have some hit list? Did you two?
Yeah.
Let's just go around, and if we've already covered it, you won't have to address it. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Lloyd, let's hear what you've got.
I know we discussed this briefly, I think, the last time. So is this what you were referring to?
I did not. This is not my editing. I had Renee printed out. Okay. I'm jumping on your bandwagon. I got more information about that since you brought this. Okay. Well, if that's the same issue you were going to talk about.
Yeah, I had some questions about it, and I know there was a brief discussion we had last time. So it would help me a lot. It seemed like there were some specific challenges from some of our citizens regarding this particular definition going back 5 years. So help me understand a specific scenario where it would benefit our citizen by only going back 1 year, I think is what the discussion was,
Okay.
versus 5 years.
And before we even do that, it looks to me like we've been handed out a complete strike-through. And I was a little worried about that. I didn't know if a complete let's just throw it out the window. I'm afraid that it might come back to bite us in the rear, so I would definitely love to hear why you did that.
Okay, I sat down with a neighbor that had substantial damage for the death. And there's some people that had substantial damage for the death, and it got some more damage in the storm of December 2023. So I really wasn't aware of all this until you raised it. I mean, I really complicated this up. But from what I see, I talked to Kyle, the 5-year look back, the 50% rule, could be very compromising when somebody repairing their house. Right? This person's has $115,000 worth of damage to their house, but their estimate only came, and I might be wrong, a couple dollars off, but basically they were only like $12,000 from being within the 50% rule. And this is nothing with the city, this is FEMA. They cannot repair their house. So now they're going to have to tear their house down. Or build, yes, and then what I brought to Kyle's attention was, well, with the 5-year look back, could this, something happen, that I had $50,000 damage last year. The storm season's coming up and I get another $75,000, $100,000 damage this year. Do I have to tear my house down? And I think if we had 0 look back, then doesn't it reset every year then?
So you can have 0 look back, and it would be per event or per permit.
Per
That's
project,
right.
Yes.
effectively.
Okay, but now it's 5 years, right?
Correct.
You know what I'm saying, Boyd? A cumulative of 5 years, so I mean, you might as well just tear down the house if you have 3 or 4 storms.
There's another scenario also. People come in and they buy a house that was recently flipped, or someone's getting ready to put their house on the market. So they do all these renovations to make it have great street look. They come in, they buy this home with expectations that they're actually going to do more with it. Well, they can't do anything with it immediately. They're stuck. They can't do any permitted projects because the person before that dumped a bunch of money into it before they sold it to bring it up to where it's worth more. And
So the first owner, they couldn't exceed it to 50%, right? So they have to apply for a permit with Pinellas County.
But it's still taxed on to the new
It's
owner.
No, I get that, right. So they put a permit in to the county, and the county does these calculations and says, okay, you're under 50%.
it's
So we're going to allow you.
actually stops with the city
City
manager.
of Bella Beach does the floodplain regulations.
Okay.
They assist,
Who says the county?
the county, they'll assist. They have their own program that they're responsible for, but
Right.
they do cross-check ours, which helps.
So is this 100% to do with flooding? I mean, why is FEMA so actively involved?
Um,
I can just offer a little bit of perspective here. What's going on is there are federal floodplain regulations that state the famed 50% rule, as it's referred to, is if you conduct improvements or repairs in excess of meeting or exceeding 50% of the structure's value, then you have to bring your structure up to modern floodplain regulations for compliance purposes. The rationale behind that is you avoid, and I'm forgetting the philosophical Greek analogy of this, of the person who replaces piece by piece of their ship, and at some point there's no original piece of the ship left, but it is the same ship, right? And so you avoid that and say, okay, if you're going to rebuild this, then we want to rebuild it in a way that is and regardless of people's perspectives on this, that is responsible and consistent with modern design standards. So elevating it above X feet above base flood elevation and other similar requirements. The look-back period in communities, whether it's none at all to 5 years, and I've seen even longer in some jurisdictions, is to prevent somebody from saying, if you have no look-back whatsoever, as Kyle suggested, it is done permit by permit. Well, if I just break my project into a series of smaller parts, let's say my home is worth $100,000, understanding that's not really many homes anymore in Bel Air Beach. But let's say your home is $100,000 and I plan to do $75,000 worth of repairs, but instead I do a series, 75 $1,000 repairs, and I work around that 50% rule. So from community standards for their firm rating, their insurance rating, and otherwise to remain compliant with FEMA's guidelines, they say, okay, we want to capture this so that en masse our properties are compliant and up to modern design standards, because it won't necessarily on a single property, but can affect your insurance rating with the federal floodplain program if your properties are knowingly not compliant with its standards. And so this is I hate to use this term given other recent discussions, a check valve of sorts on that compliance process. So that's what we're talking about. And there are guidelines that FEMA provides on determining what is the property value, which improvements do you count, and that's what Kyle's saying. He reviews with the assistance of county and at times state personnel to say, hey, I'm a little unclear because he doesn't administer this on a day-to-day at the same level. And so he relies on the resources, but ultimately those determinations at first blush are made at the local level. So that's what we're talking about.
Perfect.
And so when you try to understand why have a look-back period at all, that's the why at all. Whether it's none, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, that's ultimately your decisions as policymakers. I'm not aware, and Kyle in his previous research I believe has stated that he's not aware of any absolute requirement that you have a look-back period. But again, it's generally to facilitate your transition towards compliance and modernity, if you will.
So what would be a potential risk if we got rid of the 5-year look back and had none? And so all of a sudden we were spending a lot of money in these homes. What's the potential risk to the city?
If you have none whatsoever, you run the risk of people, and I don't mean this derisively, playing a little more fast and loose
Right.
and saying, well, no one will ever reach the 50% threshold because they'll just phase their project in a way to ever avoid being there. If you have that 50% rule, you capture whether it's, hey, I just moved into a remodel, I'm now stuck with the fact that they've already done $95,000 worth of improvements on this $200,000 house, so I'm limited to 5, and wait a year, and then I can do it. But those are the sorts of concerns. And again, I'm not opining on what you should have, just that's how it works.
And coming from the building trade, working in different states that have prevailing wage, minimum wage laws, a lot of cities and states have a minimum of $100,000, anything over, you have to have a prevailing wage tacked on it. So a lot of these municipalities will do a lot of these projects, 75, 95,000, rather than doing 500,000 for $90 job. So what I'm saying is, yes, we are giving the residents the opportunity to spruce up their homes, in the 50% mark by piecemealing it. But every time they submit a permit, you get a tax. Your taxes generally go up, and we get a benefit out of it. I mean, again, I commend you again, you're talking about aesthetics, like somebody sells a house. I'm talking about somebody getting wiped out.
Well, yeah, I get that. I mean, I know that there are some provisions in our code that deal specifically with emergencies. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Is this relating to the 50% rule, or?
I'm not sure. I've focused on 94, but I thought that there was another section that had a slightly different set of rules for
That's the
for
floodplain.
catastrophes.
Yeah, the floodplain management, and the way that I read it is the 5-year look back applies to the improvement side of things, but when you look at the definition, which is not chapter.
The other thing is, Kyle's like the hall monitor here. He gets it done. He's enforcing the law, and people start hating him because they're saying, "Oh, you're screwing me over," but he's not. He's just
Well, it's terrible for the position that Kyle is in to have to be the no guy.
yeah.
Because
Chapter 74 that's our floodplain management chapter, and that's based on a model that was provided by FEMA. And if you go to our
We're looking, can I ask another question? Just understanding the framework this is working in. So let's say, following up on your question, that if there's a violation, so we somehow don't manage this appropriately, that goes into our insurance ratings for floodplain management. Is that correct?
It can. I've not seen that directly, how that happens in a community, but it is a factor in your floodplain insurance risk management rating, your firm rating, and I don't know that that's the right acronym I was making.
And what happens with that? I mean, is that some sort of federal program for which there are penalties? Or does that go into commercial carriers' ratings? What happens with that rating?
As I'm not an administrator, I'm not in a position to intelligently speak to that beyond the obvious statement that if it affects your rating, it can affect policies. I don't know if that's at the consumer level or if that's in a, they provide, bond ratings. Moody's has now downgraded you. I don't know, honestly, but I just know that there's been discussion. There's often a discussion in barrier island communities about trying to maintain their firm rating for the discounts that are provided and the rates that are provided to end users, and understanding Member Bankard's research and efforts on are we actually seeing these discounts and everything else. I can't begin to opine on that, but that's generally my understanding. I don't have a more informed answer to give you, as it's not my role.
Do you have something to add to that?
Well, yeah, generally, yeah, that's a pretty good explanation. It's a point system, and you get points for doing certain things, and once you get the different points that add up, you get to different levels. And the better the rating, the better the insurance rates are for a community. So the communities really fight to keep those ratings in order to get the better rates for the residents on flood insurance.
Okay, so FEMA comes up with these ratings in part to implement national policy regarding our floodplains, but then that rating is used commercially for setting insurance rates? Is that
Correct, yeah, and that's just one factor. Like I said, it's one factor may not change your rating, but because it is based on points, but it all goes to the same thing, and communities, it is a valuable thing to have a better rating for the residents.
And just to note, there is a national lawsuit against the NFIP, FEMA, because they have proven that they haven't given these points and deductions and breaks to cities, communities, and people.
Which you're trying to.
Yeah, and that's still in the courts, but
They've not revealed their formula, their magic formula
Yes.
for determining how, what those rates are.
thank you.
The black box.
It's not published anywhere, and no one can answer the question. You just get it, and not in a good way. I do have a little bit of apprehension about going to no look-back period. And the reason why is because there's going to be, there's too much room for abuse. We don't have the staff for continuous over and over projects from all these homes that have been waiting a long time. I think that moving to 1 year would be a good trial balloon to see if that's sufficient. I understand that in a storm situation, a lot of things could happen, but if it's one that's completely destroyed, it's going to take a year to fix it anyway.
Oh, no argument.
Yeah.
And but the other thing I wanted to point out is all these codes that we're reviewing, we're probably not going to get to council until late summer or early fall. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I really think this should be addressed in a separate ordinance before the storm season.
Oh, well, that's possible. Yeah, we could probably do that. I would advise the council to ignore the second strikeout completely. This is a FEMA regulation, it has to be in there, whether it's 0, 1, or 5 years, or any time that we select. You still have to rely on the 50% of fair market value. So just keep that in mind, and I'm in favor of 1 year.
I'm in favor of that now get it.
Can I
Roberts.
ask,
And I think, I agree, and I think what you can apply in there is if we do the 1 year, and for some particular reason down the road, we find out that it didn't work the way we thought, we could then revisit it and alter.
Yes.
can I ask what our neighboring communities generally do? And secondly, do we need a legal opinion that this would not in any way impact our grandfather? I just always want to be sensitive to
We
that.
lost our grandfather in 2.0.
No, she's referring to the short-term rental grandfather, is that right?
Does it mean, do we touch anything regarding zoning, or is it only regarding?
It's only regarding short-term rentals, as long as we don't touch that, and that's the
Okay.
holy grail of code, all right? We just need to enshrine it and paint it on the walls.
Okay, so it's that I can let that go, it's just limited to short-term rentals.
City
Yeah.
Manager Reefer, do you see any reason whatsoever that we should not switch to 1 year?
I mean, just from a floodplain manager standpoint, it's always better to have a longer look back, because the goal is to get people to build up. Not invest so much money where it can flood, but
Build
As
up
far as-
or knock down and build up?
build up, knock down, change, convert the bottom floor. I mean, there's different methods, but they're expensive. So I can't say there's no benefit to having it, because there's a benefit for floodplain management. But when it comes to just, the big picture, benefiting the residents and letting them upgrade it, and we'd still be participants in the National Flood Insurance Program, we wouldn't be violating anything there. Like I said, I look back, and we were not scored for the credit. The credit that we earned for the 5-year look back is not very significant. It wouldn't affect us in any way.
And what do you think the impact will be on you and your staff with the additional permits?
It'll actually, I don't think you're gonna see a large influx of permits just because of the look back rule. It actually is a burden for us because we have to track everything, so a shorter look back is gonna be easier for us.
It would be easier, that makes sense. Okay, does anybody have any objections to reducing it to 1 year? No? Okay.
Any objections about getting this whole?
What we can do is, this is a work session. He's right, it's probably not a bad idea just to go ahead and do an ordinance in the next council meeting. And we just go ahead and get that one on the books because the storm season is coming.
The only hesitation I have, I'll double check with Kyle on this, is just making sure if anything in your code mandates that this kind of provision go before your planning and zoning board, before it go before you. That might be a limit to this getting to you quickly, not as late as November, to be sure. But if we have a meeting in like 2 or 3 weeks, it may not be on that agenda, only if the process requires it go before your P&Z, before it gets to you. And we'll just confirm the appropriate process.
So just in case, if we didn't do it in the April meeting, then it would be May, June, because we have to do it twice. So everybody good with that? Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
again for raising this issue.
You're very welcome. Okay, what else did we have now that we've gotten that one out of the way? I had one. Find it right quick. I think these were some that we already discussed. 94-6 landscaping, mulch. We talked about mulch and the damage that it creates whenever we have torrential downpours and flooding and things like that. Am I the only one with concerns?
No,
I think we did discuss that, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Randy, you brought up the part that if we attempt to start, for lack of a better term, dictating the type of mulch, as an example, people should be using, that may cause some issues.
In as much as I've opined on it on the past, my advice was simply that as you don't presently regulate the substrate that is used, doing so now could be perceived as a more burdensome or restrictive land development regulation within Senate Bill 250. But more broadly, as part of this discussion, the general understanding of this process is most of what we're discussing here will not be brought to you for passage until after that period in Senate Bill 250 lapses in October of 24. To my knowledge, and I've been asking planning officials, I was just on a call with some planning officials on Friday on another matter and asked if they were aware of anything in this current session that extended that. Nobody's aware of it. We're continuing to look to make sure there's, these things get hidden in fun little places. But absent some kind of extension of that moratorium, we'll be able to do so come the fourth quarter of the year. So nothing would prevent you, generally speaking, from moving forward with that. Of course, we will have to figure out how we want to administer that. If you've got dozens of properties that already have that, obviously that would be a non-conforming something. So we would have to talk about that. But it's not something you're just altogether prohibited from regulating. It's a time limitation on when you can begin.
The problem with it is it gets into the storm sewers and it goes into it goes everywhere, and it's got that, depending on what color it is, a lot of it has a dye in it. So it's an ecology issue, it's a safety issue.
I've seen it completely cover a neighbor's yard. I've seen it completely cover the boat ramp. I've seen it completely clog drains. It's useful. I get it. It's useful, and it's something that many people rely on, and it's cheap compared to just about everything else. But this is something that we should seriously consider doing away with, or putting a regulation on it. And then you have to think about, everyone already has it. Well, are they allowed to replenish it as it deteriorates, or is that it? And how do you police it?
Plenishing it would be tough to police. It'd be kind of having to make a transition. It would be easier going forward. I think people would be getting more in there, and it'd be hard to tell.
Something that we might think about with issues such as this is rather than having more laws, maybe we can initiate more communication and education. I think most people want to be good conservationists, but they just don't know what to do. Like, I never even thought about that, the fact that there was dye in mulch. Never thought about it. So maybe we could use a committee somewhere or start launching some better educational material and publish it, get it out to the community.
In the words of the former city manager, who was my neighbor, when I was putting down the mulch in my yard, he said, that stuff floats. And I said, I've never thought of that. And it did. And he says, that's why we use shells.
And as far as making more laws, it would be less code than what we have now. Right now, there's 3 paragraphs that cover this, and you could sum it up with 1 sentence. But you could also actually put in there why it is. It's because of the flooding issues and the mess it makes and clogging but I don't know.
My only advice on this, and this is not intended to sway the conversation but to inform it, my only advice on this, and I'm going to repeat this in each of these discussions, is the reminder of concerns about enforceability from your staff's side, and also whether, in fact, you wish for this to be enforced. Because understand at some point, somebody's going to come up to you and say, Mayor, can you believe I got cited $125 because I put mulch in my front yard? What's this about? I thought this was free Florida and da-da-da-da-da-da. And as long as it's a value of this community, you can stand by that and say, well, it is, but this is the reason, and we think it's good policy, whatever, that's fine. But just be prepared to stand by and behind whatever you enact, so you're not putting your staff in the position of, well, I was informed, well, we never thought you were gonna cite anybody, we just wanted to kind of send the message. Well, if we want to send the message on things, and I'm not saying this is that, but if it is, then opportunities like education are usually a better way than, $110 or $125 fine because, somebody was gardening on a Saturday, if that's your concern.
Well,
So again, I don't have an opinion on it, I just want to make sure we're clear on that as we go through and change things.
well, here's where I'm at right now. It does create a problem, and right here in our code, we're giving them instructions on what they're supposed to do with it, which means we're inviting people in our code. If we're all about education and you don't want them to do it, then I would recommend removing it completely. If that's the stance the council wants to take.
What section are we reviewing right now?
It's on page 7.
94.6.
Yes, sir.
Along those lines, I think possibly, and we won't know until we do it this way, but more of a recommendation as part of like a pamphlet would go out for the new homeowners or everyone, and we would have it on the website. This is what we recommend, and here's why we're recommending this. Instead of it being an actual enforceable code, which is going to cause problems, I think a large percentage of our citizens would probably get on board with that. Just like Kim was referencing, a lot of people don't know that it's a problem. But if we had some type of a document or information on our website that explained landscaping requirements, and part of that was the use of mulch and why we don't recommend that necessarily. They do make non-floating mulch. I don't know how well it works. I have seen that.
It's called
bag.
blocks.
For another word, yeah. But they do make a type of bark and mulch out there that theoretically is supposed to not float. I actually used it when I was in Boots for a while because it was parts of my yard where it would puddle and float off. It stayed. I don't know how big of a storm it would take to move it. But again, I think the education approach and recommendation approach of saying, hey, here's what we recommend, here are the products we recommend, here's why we're recommending this, and we would appreciate your help with that, because here's the problem it causes. I think a lot of the people would come on board.
And I think, Mayor, bringing this to the council's attention, my problem is puddling is one thing. It doesn't work. Even stuff you buy on Depot doesn't work. But when you have 2 or 3 feet of water,
Sure.
and waves in your street, I don't care what it is, it's going to.
It's going to move it.
And like I said, he said it best. I mean, some people that have any in their yard, in their whole yard, it's just covered with it.
Well, I think there's plenty of sites out there we can look through to determine what are the best materials to use in landscaping that aren't going to be subjected to floating point. Where there's
Well, here's my recommendation. Obviously, it seems pretty hardcore to say you can't put mulch in your yard. I understand that. And the only reason why I bring it up is because I saw what happened, especially in your neighborhood on your street, in your neighborhood on your street. I didn't see it so much where mine was at, but I didn't flood. So I would let's just bypass this one for now. Let's add this to another work session and continue this conversation and see if we can come up with some solutions. I don't want to bog the whole meeting down on this one topic. I had 2 more that are on page 34, and that was dealing with the number of stories.
Hey, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, page 34, that was dealing with the number of stories with homes being built.
Height code.
yes, 34 or 45, or say something.
You know
36 or 45, yeah, it's,
Wow, it's funny, Adobe Market is page 34, I don't know why. Anyway, so what it was under heights. The first recommended change was changing 2 to 3 habitable stories alongside a garage or storage area. So that would be making use of the space that you're not supposed to use if you have a 3-story home. Then right behind that is or you add insert 2 over a garage or storage area. So you're still limited to 3 stories, even if you don't make the bottom story habitable. Does that make sense? So 2 above the garage or 3 from the garage level up.
does it change anything with the overall?
Overall height remains the same.
Okay.
You're making more taxable
Right.
square footage in the same box.
The one thing that did change the overall height is when we adopted the Florida Building Code with the 1 foot of freeboard. Because our height code is based off of the base flood elevation. But there's base flood elevation and then there's the design flood elevation, that's including the freeboard. So, given that, we could adjust our height code to be based on the design flood elevation as opposed to the base flood elevation. Because they're kind of getting shorter to a foot. Because you're only going 35 feet above whatever your map says what BFE is. But then you got the design flood elevation, so you have to go at least 1 foot higher for your local floor. So just something that changed when we adopted that freeboard that we might want to go to.
So instead of 35, it would be 36.
Or you could just say,
Just change it.
it's 35 above the DFE instead of the BFE. Because the DFE can change based on what the freeboard is.
Okay.
That's the peak of the roof.
Yeah.
It doesn't include any towers.
Want to start?
Did you get that?
I did, yeah, and that's more, how more communities do it, is based on a design flood elevation.
Okay.
The towers are
Makes
inside.
sense.
And so that was 3 stories or 2 stories. The 2 stories are above the garage, or 3 stories are beside the garage. And so an example of 2 stories would be where you're in a lower elevation and you could go 2 stories above your garage. That was all I had. How about you, Lloyd?
Well, the artificial turf synthetic grass, because I just went across that relatively recently, we addressed that.
Yeah.
And we wrote it as like 22.
Yeah.
So that should be pretty good, I believe. Have we had any issues come up with that
No.
since then?
I've had 2 new homes use artificial turf, and I've been following, the screening from the road and if they use it in the front, they have to have it between bigger
Lots
lots
and things like that,
Yeah. So we've been following it. The one thing I'm gonna have to pay close attention to is there was a section there that talked about if you already had it,
Mhm.
and within so many years you had to,
Replace
get it to code.
Under code.
So,
That is, yeah. The only thought I had when I read it, because I know we spent a decent amount of time making sure that this was best for the city. I think it is, the way it was written, it is written. But I thought of Mike, because he was actually allergic to grass. And that was the main reason that he had artificial grass. So my thought is, why do we actually have that part of the code in there discussing the front yard only? That you can only have it in the front yard if it's used at 4-inch maximum spaces between blocks and things like that, as opposed to if somebody was, that to me sounds like a legitimate reason why you wouldn't want grass, real grass, anywhere around you if you're really allergic to it. That would be. But I was just curious, why would we allow the artificial turf that meets our restrictions as the type of in the sides and the back. Obviously, the back is probably not seen, but in the front, we allow it, but only in a manner that we're gonna have it between blocks. That just seems like a lot of work. Why wouldn't we allow it?
And now they're shores, some of the houses there are totally artificial.
Right. I was just curious,
It's just the aesthetics of
Yeah, uniformity. Yeah, we're trying to create a certain look and feel in the community. Cruising right along and all of a sudden, this crazy looking green that stands right up. I'm guessing that's why that happened.
all right, I was just, when I was reading that through again, I thought, wow, it's interesting. But you're right, on the other side of the street, we see the artificial
It's
grass. A lot of
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, and then on the side, it says it can be there, but you can use method, you can screen it, you know, with landscaping, fences.
World over there.
I just wonder how the drainage is like, because the old stadiums, I never ripped that up every 3 or 4 years. And you have the same burning stuff.
I saw we say it's considered impervious, and it is,
Yeah.
so we,
Yeah.
it goes right through it.
You think it's clogged.
Right, yeah, we dirt and stuff.
Did you have other items?
On the fences, now, if you recall, I was just here a little while, and I was replacing a wooden fence that needed to be replaced. And at the time, I spoke with someone that said, well, if you're replacing an existing fence that's beyond repair with a new fence, and if it's not the same material, it required a permit. And is that, have we already changed that? Because I didn't see that this go around. Because I was replacing a wooden fence with a vinyl fence. And we had just a brief discussion, and I think the decision was made, well, it did not require a permit, even though it was using a different material for the fence. Because it was going to the exact same place,
Yeah,
exact same height.
I think with fences, you have to be careful if it's a repair as is, kind of like a dock when they're repairing the boards. It's fine, it's the same, but if you're switching material, then what if you're switching the height in different areas?
Yeah, it was.
You know, and you
Has to
have a
stay
lot of
everything
things
the
that
same.
stipulate exactly.
I have a good example as to why that would be, and I may be wrong, but this would be my guess. Whenever the county comes out and they inspect the fence, it is the county, right?
County does a wall because a wall
Okay,
has a
well,
footer.
okay, who inspects the actual fence?
We get
So you inspect it a certain way, and you verify that the post is in the ground, there's concrete, blah, blah, blah. But you also look at the way that it's attached. You take a foreign type of, say, a hybrid plastic or something like that, it's not going to attach the same way. You're not going to nail it in. So how are you going to do that? And I think what it is that if you can repair it, but you need to put it back the way that it was inspected, unless you change the whole thing, would be my guess.
Right, and that's what I was doing at the time. The only reason I brought it up, I couldn't find that this time. And you showed me before, when I was talking to you about replacing the fence, that there was information that stipulated if you're using a different material, you're replacing an entire fence, and it was made of wood, and you're tearing the wood down and putting it with a different product, that would require a permit.
I think any fence replacement, I don't know about, I thought you could repair a small section, but I didn't think you could tear out your entire fence and put it back up without a permit and inspection.
How about neighbor A has a wooden fence, he doesn't want to take it down, so neighbor B
Put something in next to
I like fence, you need a permit.
Yep.
Because my first question to my neighbor, I didn't know who owned the fence. I said, is this my fence or your fence? And because it was falling down, he said, well, it's obviously your fence. I said, no problem, I'll take care
Did
of
he
it.
go in with your cost?
No. good neighbor. But that, again, when I was reading it through this time, so maybe it was in a different code where it addressed that, replacing an entire fence, because I didn't see it. This go through. Not a big deal, I was just wondering.
I know it discusses the exact materials you can use. One thing, well, I always advise people when they're replacing a fence or changing things around, you really should have it surveyed, or at least have the fence company locate the monuments for the property. You'd be surprised what you think is yours is not yours at all. But if you don't have a survey for the house, you shouldn't be on someone else's property putting a new fence up.
Yeah. Anything else?
We can move on to somebody else, I've got something to give you.
Okay, all right.
I have quite a few questions just in terms of questions, mostly for what your experience has been. So one is sheds. Have we had any issues with sheds, and is that something we need to think about in terms of our ordinance? It's 110.
We haven't had any major issues with what we have on the books now. There was when they made the code for the shed, that is our only additional structure that you're allowed on your property as far as like an accessory building is the shed, and it's got very defined rules on size, height, wind rating, and it also, I think, said something along the lines of if you already had a shed that didn't conform. So when that got put in place, the previous city manager, he really went through and eliminated a lot of the violations that were, whether it was in the setback, whether you could see it from the road, whether you had multiple sheds. So I think after that first sweep, it hasn't been an issue. I think it's a good section of code.
Okay, good. 206 deals with wood frame construction, and I thought this was interesting in that it can be constructed, a building can be constructed with basically what a third party says is okay. And what has our experience been with that, and is that too broad of a delegation to a third party?
I'd have to check this with somebody who knows the building code well, because it might get trumped by the building code.
Okay, because it says it says that you can use wood so long as it's of the type that a structural engineer or a licensed architect says is okay. So I'm sure somebody that wants something questionable can do some shopping among architects and structural engineers and find an opinion that suits them. Is that okay, or have we had any problems?
We haven't had any problems. Usually, especially with the engineers, like the structural engineers, they're licensed if they're willing to sign off. It's on them.
Earth berms are prohibited. I was just wondering why. Pardon? That is in a definition, and it is on page 37, item 21. Earth berms are not permitted. I was just wondering why. Some people use that as a landscaping technique, down a little hillock with, is that what we're talking about? Some sort of little hillock with a tree on it and some plantings, or what's meant
Yeah.
here?
I don't know why. That's been there.
Louis, can you shed anything on that?
What's the section number?
It is,
21, page 37.
yeah, it's under 251, sub 21.
Yeah, I think my page numbers are different, but
It's 37, page 37.
I'm thinking it's related to drainage.
I was just wondering why it's there. I mean, I'm not a proponent of berms, I just don't know why that's sir.
It's probably to keep your neighbor from putting a big heel in his yard. That would be my guess.
Well, okay, well, if it's not been a problem, I guess. Is there anything in our code which would address landscaping of the type that we see occasionally where people kind of put in a desert landscape? You know, they basically get rid of all. Yeah.
Zero landscape.
Yeah, do we care about that? And is that,
We have several of them around town.
do we like them? Do we not? Or is that an issue?
It's a reduction in water usage.
Swiftman likes it. Swiftman likes it a lot.
Yeah, the only problem we
Zero
have
scaping.
is at one point they were installing the asphalt underneath the rock.
Oh, no.
Keep the weeds
So-
from
So
growing.
there'd be no,
Yeah.
and I would
so
think that that's
it's
a
not-
maintenance issue too, that the weeds start coming up and you might, I mean, it looks like everybody's doing it well now, but
Yeah, because even if you do put a barrier for weeds, eventually you're gonna get enough organic material in there to grow weeds.
and then you start putting more chemicals on, which is not good. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
No, it's hard to stick a flag into.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I brought my hammer and screwdriver.
yeah. I haven't heard any complaints.
Section 255, we have a requirement that if a project exceeds $20,000, you have to get an appraisal. What's been our experience?
I personally would either be fine with getting rid of that, because we're tracking this anyways. And the way it's worded is, it says, you're required to get an appraisal, not if you have property that's, the structure's worth a lot of money, and you are trying to do something minimal, to where like add, like replace the windows or something, and you just decide you want to use what the property appraiser has for the fee, 50% value. I think that's very reasonable, as opposed to, you're trying to do, doing window replacement. Most window jobs now are over $20,000, and to have to like go and get an appraisal on top of it.
Exactly.
How old is this thing?
Pretty old, early 90s.
It's 94.
Oh, just being the devil's advocate, how would you track what the value of the upgrade is?
We track it because you have to write the value of the permit as it comes through. So we typically use 20,000 as a marker to look into the history some more. But when it comes to getting an appraisal, just that's a burden to residents. If we are doing we're going to be doing the substantial improvement affidavit anyways, for, whether they're going to get a value.
Right.
It's just whether, requiring that they do an appraisal for there's a lot of people that just want to do an improvement to their house and they're fine just using the value of the property appraiser. So,
Trying to figure out how the county is going to establish a taxable value for an upgrade. It sounds like that's what this is in here for, so that they can establish that, but are they not doing that now?
I don't believe so, because we're just using appraisals as an option, because if you use what the property appraiser says for their value, you're not going to get as much as you would from an appraisal. So we allow it because it gives them a little bit more to work with.
So you're asking, would they use that actual number as a tool to add to the appraisal value of the county? I don't think they do that.
On the permits side of things.
Whenever I look at the, I go to the property appraisal.
Oh, and they
plans,
show everything
It
that's happened
shows
over
all
time.
the things that have been done, and there's a cash value out to the side, they're using it. That's probably what this is talking about.
Randy, can you add anything to this?
No, ma'am, I cannot.
I think that's the property appraiser calculations for, so that the work is permanent and they're tracking the value of the permit at the very bottom. And then as they reevaluate the structure of the property and whatever was done to it, they're calculating that.
I'm just wondering where they get the number that they're plugging into the value of the project.
When they get up from any permit?
No, I mean, you get a permit on a project, but how many times are you over budget? Something doesn't go right, or
I've noticed that typically those values are low. As compared
Which
to
is
what
what
you
we
actually
want.
spend, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
I think everything that they appraise through the property appraiser, it tends to be on the lower side.
Yeah.
They'll try to be fair about it.
I'm fine with taking it out. Everyone else?
Yeah. It just seems like a burden. People don't need to, one more hoop they don't need to jump through. And the last thing that I have is that I assume we're going to have some sort of discussion on antennas and towers. So just,
No.
That.
I don't think that's an issue for anybody here. I'm joking.
I thought we had that discussion.
Yeah. We have had some of that discussion, I will tell you, as recently as the last few days. I even exchanged correspondence with the lawyer who had represented the gentleman through the last process, first thanking him for facilitating his client coming into compliance with the existing code, but also asking if there were any samples he offered, not because we would fully endorse necessarily their approach, but again, to give us the full complement of information as we consider what revisions we want to implement. But that is an issue we are certainly tuned into on what structural limitations we want to provide, and making sure if we are going to reasonably accommodate amateur antenna radios as federal law requires, that we have clear criteria rather than leaving it up to guesswork on how that'll be navigated.
Well, I brought up about height, and don't take this the wrong way, but you could get like a definition, you know, how high it is.
Yeah,
Now that I'm at 60 feet, can I go to 120?
for sure.
Can I go to 240?
So the challenge with this is, much like when we discuss variances, right? In variance parlance, when you're seeking a variance, one of the things in our code and in most codes that you have to establish, and I think Mr. Cerno will speak to this as well, is that it's the minimum variance necessary. So in our code, we can have a presumptive limitation of some reasonable height. Let's say we allow flagpoles to be 25 feet or something like that. So we say, okay, fine, 30 feet is generally allowed. Other than that, we can't say absolutely nothing over 30 feet. We can say 30 feet is the limit, but you may be able to get a variance if you can establish A, B, and C. When you look at federal guidelines, one of the things it says is you can have a height limit, but if they can establish that 40 feet is the minimum height necessary to operate and receive signals for that amateur radio antenna, a city is likely going to have to make that reasonable accommodation. Now, if they can accomplish that at 40 feet, but they're looking to go to 65, I don't know, 40 feet's the number. You might want 65, but you've proven that, we've established that 40 is what you need. So when we talk about the amateur radio antenna towers, one, I don't want to give this an outsized amount of attention in this process. In the 30 years, there's been one that's proven a challenge, and I don't mean to diminish the concern for that property owner who attempted to erect it and his neighbors and their respective concerns, but it is not as though this is a, great issue in our community that's proliferated in the way some other communities are dealing with short-term rentals, for example. But if we're going to regulate it, we should do it intelligently with an eye towards what the regulations are. So at the risk of beating the dead horse, yes, we are aware of that. We are trying to craft it in a way that is cognizant of and compliant with modern state and federal standards. And the challenges with telecommunications especially is those preemptions keep growing.
Sure.
Well,
So my general questions were, one was, it seemed like the one problem that we did have stemmed from the fact that that particular application ended up being an antenna, right? The whole thing was considered an antenna?
It has more to do, and I can speak to you, Ms. Elliott, just because you do have a legal background. There's a bit of a legal fiction that the tower and the antenna, once joined, are functionally one, and an antenna in our code treated those as differently. And in fact, before I received any meaningful guidance from, or information from opposing counsel, if you will, in this process, I looked at our code and said our code treats a tower and antenna as separate things. But once you start to look at how the case law actually treats them and how communities are often overturned, the legal fiction is once the tower is mounted to the antenna, it is all considered the antenna.
So, anyway, how do we address that going forward would be one of my questions. You know, how do we get sensitive to that so somebody doesn't put up yet another one? And the other observation I had is, are there any prohibitions of leasing that space or that capability? So let's say someone has erected a large antenna and is using it for their ham radio operation, but they start putting microwaves on it and selling it to the, you know, a satellite company or something. Is there anything that would prohibit a commercial use of it?
Well, I think at the point that you put a commercial use, then you immediately remove it from the scope of being an amateur radio antenna. I can think of other situations that I'd rather not provide a roadmap to in this context that I'd be happy to discuss with you privately that we may not be able to necessarily prevent or limit. But generally speaking, it would have to remain an amateur radio antenna tower within FCC guidelines. And one of those is that it is not used for commercial purposes. So if you start leasing the real estate that is the antenna itself to say, oh, now you can put a satellite dish on here and and Time Warner can do this and all that, then I think we would have an argument that it's no longer an amateur radio antenna tower, or at least exclusively being used in a way that's consistent with those regulations. We can certainly, if we're going to get into that level of proactive regulation, we can say that it shall be limited to the amateur and not provide vertical access. Once we start drafting language, we can definitely be sensitive to that.
Yeah, that would be my thought.
Here's my problem. 20 minutes ago, we were talking about the height of the house, 35.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, why can't I build my house 60 feet before allowing antennas?
Because there's not federal regulations preempting our regulation of the issue. I mean, it's as simple as we are in the hierarchy of government authorities. We are Baby Brother, and so if Big Brother's going to tell us otherwise, then we just got to follow those rules. I mean, that's really the simplest distillation of it. Is the state and the federal guidelines have told us you cannot place an absolute limit. I'm not saying we can't place a limit. If we do place a limit, we just have to recognize we may later have to have some reasonable accommodation. There's no similar guidance for a residential structure, at least not yet, knock on whatever the closest thing to being wood is. But
So, I guess to put an end to this portion of the conversation,
Lewis is going to fix it, and I'll just pass
if
whatever he
anything,
thinks.
our code is more restrictive in this particular case than it should be. Is that right? Or is it that our code works just fine, but he's going to shore it up a little bit so that we better understand what we're up against?
My honest assessment is your code can use improvement. There were a lot of ambiguities in this process. The fact that we had to search code to determine is this a structure, is it within a setback, are there site limits, we should be able to better define that. And if we presented one of the delays in the permitting process was trying to tell the applicant what this is and is not within our code. I think we can improve our code, and in improving our code, bring it more into compliance with the modern parlance and regulations.
And we probably would have been able to do that sooner had a certain individual actually applied for a permit.
Right, I mean, that was part of the process. There was, but I think, honestly, if my personal reflection as a city attorney, I'm glad that the gentleman is in compliance now, but I think that this was also a testament to how well run your city is. Because the gentleman came into the code enforcement process saying, I'm not applying for a permit because they're just going to deny me, and and no one's going to take my permit seriously. And instead, that's exactly what this community did. You did a very detailed review of your regulations, applied the ones that you could, voiced your concerns with the permitting officials about the things you couldn't regulate, but wanted to make sure they were addressed. They were addressed to all regulating authorities' limits, and they ultimately got the permit that they thought was impossible. I think that's a testament to this community doing its job and serving its residents. So yes, to the extent he assumed it was futile, that delayed the process. But similarly, to the extent it was assumed that we could stop this, and a moment ago, Ms. Elliott, you suggested, as long as we can stop this. We can't stop this. We can regulate it better. But I cannot promise you that even after we amend our code, if somebody comes with an application, that they will not be able to regulate an amateur radio antenna, because the law strongly favors the ability to do that.
No, I understand that.
And I say that both for your benefit, but also the record, if you will.
Anything else, Ms. Elliott?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Baker?
2 points you raised and I raised. I'm satisfied, I think.
All right. Very well. And Mr. Reefer?
Some of the things I just brought up with Louis was non-structural fill, maybe have some guidelines on that.
Say that one more time, please.
Non-structural fill,
Okay.
where, people are bringing in, or they're putting their seawall caps and they're filling up their yards, and causing a big difference between the neighbor's yard and their yard, and using the kind of wall that's not meant to be a retaining wall as a retaining wall in some situations, so. That's something I want to look into. I wanted to look into flagpoles, because we do, anywhere in the code really define where a flagpole can be.
Flagpole.
Yeah. We had some of it in the sign, but I think this also crosses over into the zoning because it's the placement of where it is.
We have a height restriction we talked about a year ago.
We were talking about it in the sign area.
Right, that and the flag size is.
And then we mentioned before, and we'll come up with something where we'll put the hedges and the plants in the front setback, taking into consideration some of like the cul-de-sacs, because we could make exceptions for it. But I think that was more you wanted us to craft what we thought the language should be when we bring it to you. I think it would be in this section, but maybe some basic guidelines of holiday decorations. And not trying to create a whole bunch of rules, but maybe having some rules.
They have to be down within 3 months of the holiday.
Or maybe height, because we did recently
I'm
have
talking about the giant
a large
balloons.
one. Yeah.
The giant balloons.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was a danger to anyone, but people may not want to do that.
All or just during a certain time period.
Whenever it's bigger than the house is. It really was. I mean.
I don't know where you're talking.
it
I've
was
seen some
huge.
multiple towns where, people drive for miles just to see.
I got a neighbor, I take my hat off from, he decorates his whole garden with something flavorful. I mean, and nothing's fake. And right after Christmas, they're down. I mean, right after Christmas.
That's a good thing.
But I mean, people go down the street just to look at it.
So that would be great, Council. You're saying you guys would put something together
Yeah.
about that, let us review it.
I would say that my opinion on, two opinions. One is that leaving lights up for a long, long time, maybe, is that a free speech thing? Are you speaking whenever you're throwing light-colored lights all over your?
I mean, there's definitely a free speech analysis that would have to be done. I'm not saying that it would be absolutely protected by the First Amendment. You know, when you start getting into design aesthetics, free speech comes up as a concern. And again, maybe you have lights on, but then they put one up that says like "Stop the War" and they use Christmas lights. So now that analysis is different. But you know, the caution again against the line between an HOA and a community on regulating aesthetics.
I really don't think it's a big problem in Bel Air Beach with year-round holiday lights. The giant balloon in high winds does worry me a little bit.
And I mean, culturally, it's just also, you know, they are marketing and selling more things like this, right? Like as we get into Halloween, there's skeletons that are now this size, and then Home Depot just announced the skeleton's gonna have a dog that's roughly the same size that you can buy. So, you know, it's also, these things can sometimes be cyclical in terms of that.
Why put out 35 small decorations when you could put out one giant one? Anything else?
There was a couple things I brought up with the floor area ratio that we're going to look into, just defining that. Because when you're building like over a garage storage area and you're building 2 stories above, the way it's defined right now in the code is saying that you have to count the garage storage area in your floor area ratio, but that can't be so, because it severely limits you on how big. So we're looking into that, come up with a better definition. Just a little bit more mention of generators.
What about generators?
Really just getting them talked about. They've been interpreted as the same encroachment, 4 feet, like you can have your condenser, but just to have it in there.
We're talking fixed generator, not a pool.
Yes, fixed generators. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to look into, and I don't know if this can be done in any specific way, but where we have side setback exemptions or exceptions in Bellevue Estate Island, if there's something we can do with making it possibly more reasonable for someone to put a dock in. You know, and some kind of consideration for the lots that have the very.
Obviously, I'm going through this process right now, and I've put a lot of thought into it. I think, as much as it pains me to say it, I think the reason why they have the 12-foot setback is because you can get a big boat in there. And what if your neighbor wants a big boat too, and it's less than 24 feet? Well, now you're maybe creating conflict. Now, you want to reduce it, I'm all for it, so I'm never on a boat that size, but I'm just saying, that may be why it's 12 feet. Anyone have thoughts on that?
Speaking of big boats, we've had the largest I've seen since I've been here is a 65-footer.
For a marine.
That off of one of the water lots,
Okay.
but there was no code violation. There were some neighbors that were concerned because they couldn't see anything on their back anymore. But there wasn't an actual code violation or any kind of navigable violation of the waterway. So I don't know if that's something we want to think about.
A maximum
Yeah.
length? It's not too far out there where it's at, but I can understand concerns.
What about the total rates Mr. Attorney,
Sir,
is there an answer to that, littoral rights on the bay, or?
littoral rights on the bay. My short answer would be to defer back to the discussion we had when there was some concern about the number of boats in the waterway, which is to say the city does not regulate the waterway. So once the boats are in the water, that's not really our purview.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's blocked. This guy has a 65-foot boat, I live here, I can't see to the left, you know?
Yeah, you have no right to view left and right of your property, and that is a consistent issue that comes up in coastal communities, whether it's, hey, they put up palm trees now, or they put up a sculpture that I don't like the look of, and now I can't see the sunset the way I used to. You have no right to a view across your neighbor's property. You can look straight out, and even as you're straight out, only because in some of these coastal communities, we have what have alternatively been described as fingers, or a series of cul-de-sacs that view each other. While you have a right straight out, you don't have your right straight out stops at that next property line. So you don't have a right straight out to then govern what you can see on the neighbor's property across the water. But of course, somebody can't come and build a wall at the rear of your seawall to block you. But you can't say, I used to enjoy the sunset in the east, and now they've put up a slide for their kids, and I can't. That's not a thing. No, I appreciate the question. It's a common question.
Yeah.
And also a common assertion made. And Louis, I don't mean to draw you into this too much, but from a planner's perspective, does that come up for you often, the arguments about regulating across the property?
Yeah, that's always a discussion at permitting and things like that, but yeah, you're right.
As long as it doesn't get into site triangles closer to the roadway, then it's not a thing. But that's not what you're talking
No, I'm
about on the
talking
water
about-
side. Yeah.
As large as a 65-foot craft is, it's actually not causing any problems as far as the waterway goes.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
I think, if you were going to look into something like that, maybe it would be per inlet. If you're going into these baby harbors, okay, how much clearance do you have on each side? And it looks to me like the way they design them, they're about equal all the way around. So maybe if you took another 65-footer and put it directly across the harbor from it, then how much room do you have left? I don't know. That's another question. It's a unique circumstance for sure.
Yeah. And then lastly, I talked about this with Louis with the multifamily homes. We currently have in our code that if you put like a wall or a fence on the property, it's supposed to stop before the seawall cap. There's probably 50% of them don't, they go to over the seawall cap. Louis said that it's common that that's something we could change, that other communities allow that. I guess, it's obviously to kind of prevent people from walking over the seawall caps across property lines.
I'm not opposed to it, and the reason why is because people have dogs.
Sure. And
That's
then
the
on
way-
residential, same deal.
That's the way you can contain your dog.
Yeah, currently, we define the property line, rear property line as the inside edge of the seawall. But I'd like to look into making an exception, because people have done it, allowing the fence or wall to extend. Just to make it,
Just to keep people from crossing over.
yeah, and make it, allowed in our code so it doesn't become an issue.
Because right now it says you're supposed to stop at the inside.
If you were to break it all down,
Right.
you have be a violation.
Anything else?
That is it for 94.
Well, that was far less painful than I expected it to be. That's pretty good. Sir, do you have any questions for us?
No, I was gonna say the same thing. We had got some good comments, good notes. I think we got a lot to work with.
Good. Do we have anything else for us?
Not really.
No? Okay.
Is there anything
I forgot one more thing. We talk about it, it comes up in the history. I just recently spoke with Larry Fleming about the observation, choosing a flat roof to have an observation or an access. Larry said in history, they did not allow them because if there was anything on that top of the roof, like say an electrical outlet, anything that, like a utility that would consider it to be a habitable space, they wouldn't allow it unless it was only the second habitable. So if you just have a one-story habitable and then you have the observation. A lot of people are proposing building the houses with access to the roof with, not doing anything on that top, like putting water access or electricity or anything like that.
It's it.
So just have access to the roof. So, that's something that I'd like to figure out if it's something we allow or don't allow.
Well, now you've just made it 40 feet, 50 feet, because you're gonna have humans standing up there, so now it's even higher. And they're gonna put a table up there, or chairs, or, something is gonna be up there, so now we're going even higher.
Do we address even though we don't make roofs that are flat, they sort of slant some way, but do we address that anywhere in our code, in our building code?
We don't have anything against the flat roof. Yeah, it's just, there's nothing that says, that really addresses having like that observation point. Like in the past, they had said no because they could tell from the plan somebody was trying to run, like have a bar up there.
Sure.
Yeah.
And party.
But if they just have like parapets and access, I don't know if it's something they want to think about.
I don't know. It's not been a problem. I don't know if we would be creating a problem by setting regulations.
I know in a more modern type of architecture, you'll see that more often. You just see that. Driving around our city, I don't know if I've seen too many houses that have what people consider a flat roof.
Yeah, there's,
See, the way that I'm leaning on all of this, even the reluctance of changing the flood elevation level, it makes sense what you proposed, but at the end of the day, little by little, we're taking away what makes Bel Air Beach so special. We're a small, quiet, sleepy little beach community. And every time one of these little homes is knocked down and built up, it's great for somebody, but is it great for everyone else? And that's what worries me about us eventually becoming something that we don't recognize anymore. So I will always lean towards anything that puts a cap on how high we can go and what you can do with it once you build it that high. So I would discourage everyone from being pro rooftop bar.
Well, that's why at 94 too, it really needs to be addressed, because if we don't do something, we're gonna lose that Golden Girls mentality, that broken homes, the ranch homes, that this community really is based on.
Yeah.
And like you said, we'll end up with monstrosities, and it'll benefit the homeowner first, but it's just what we're doing. So it's
Right.
unique,
Well,
So,
I'm having trouble even understanding this from a safety standpoint, because if it's flat roof, as you mentioned, it's going to be sloped in some fashion just because it has to drain. So are you building something on top of it? And then is there people aren't just gonna sit on a roof. Just
Yeah.
there's some sort of structure around where they're sitting.
We don't have a minimum, like half to 12-inch pitch or anything like that.
We don't have any. I've heard there's communities that don't allow flat roofs.
Sure.
And I think we probably got what? 3 or so.
A few, handful.
I mean, flat, or you got like just a small drain going in this, like, the middle of the river.
This is what I think. I think that if you build the full 3 stories, you can't use your roof as a standing surface. If you build 2 full stories from the ground or from your garage level, well then, sure, you can build a nice little overlook hangout spot. It's still 3 stories. But I say that I just firmly
No, no,
Keep it under the
believe
house,
that if you open that Pandora's box, then you're really giving them 4 stories now. And that's what it's gonna look like. You're gonna have walls up there and, handrails and everything else. I don't, that's not what I wanna see in Miller Beach.
Yeah. It'd be almost like trying to have like a conversion for the roof.
Right. So if you feel that you need to put something in the code that protects us from that, please go for it. We'll look at it whenever we do the review.
Yeah, I think you hit a point because that would be a great feature to build for the 90-day rental. Seriously, you know what I'm saying? To rent something out, and I think you're dead on. Restrict there as much as possible.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? All right. Louis, I appreciate it.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, now we're on to other business. And Lloyd had brought it up, I was going to bring it up too, was currently we have 2 applicants for the for our council member positions. We don't know how many council members we need until tomorrow. Was today the official last day that we are taking, or does it end tomorrow? I can't
I
remember.
believe it ends tomorrow.
Okay, it ends tomorrow. So if anyone knows anyone that would like to possibly serve on the council and would like to be considered a nominee, they need to get in their application tomorrow. This is the end and we're cutting it off. After all the applications are in, would you make sure that everyone gets a copy
Yes.
of what we've got? Currently, we only have 2. I originally wanted to do a miniature work session and we just bring them in and we hash all that out in a work session and we vote for them in the meeting, but I don't see any reason to bring them in twice. I think we can contact them individually, ask them questions, and then at our next meeting, we'll vote for whatever it is that's required of us. Which right now it's 3, but it could be 1. I'm hoping. I have faith that we're only going to need 1 person, and we'll move forward from there.
Mayor, I just want to make sure I'm clear on, when we're talking about the numbers, if the voters approve all of the proposed charter amendments, there is a phasing from 7 seats to 5 seats, and that does not happen immediately. I just want to be clear about that. Obviously, this council can decide what it does with that information. If someone applies, you're under no obligation to appoint that person, whether you deem them qualified or if you think they're not an appropriate fit. But I just want to make clear that, and again, we will, once we know the results of the election, I will later this week provide some guidance on what does all this mean now, once I can make heads or tails of it. But as written, the ordinances and resolutions contemplate a date certain, not immediate, where we would transition from 7 to 5 formally.
Right.
So you will still have 7 seats on your council come Friday, regardless of what happens on the vote. Whether you choose to fill those seats is a different question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting. So, okay, I'm a little confused.
Okay.
But that's all right. That's
Yeah,
all
no,
right.
I think I can even succinctly address this, because I'm also eager to adjourn if there's no other business, but the way that it was done was you're switching to, let's say everything is approved. You're going to have an election your next election would be November, I think, of 2026.
26, right?
And I think it was at the November 2026 election, I'm not certain of this, but I think it was at that election that you phased down to 5.
Correct.
And so that's what I was saying, so you would still be 7 people until that date. Whether or not you choose to fill 7 vacancies is a different question. The challenge you face again is, having more for that time gives you the flexibility as it relates to quorums and other issues. But as the ordinances were written, we were phasing on that election cycle, if memory serves. And again, I'm going from my memory, it's been a while, but I know it was not, hey, come April, suddenly we're a council of 5, because we needed to appropriately phase that in relationship to the election cycles.
So is it possible for the council to only nominate one and bring in one?
You could decide to appoint none, either of them. You could fill 0, you could fill 1, you could fill all of them. That's ultimately your purview, as the charter tasks you with filling vacancies. And I've been part of commissions where they've said, no, I don't want, they've had 10 applicants and said, I don't want any of them. That's ultimately your purview, and whatever, obviously different choices have different consequences in terms of how you operate, but ultimately it is your call on who is and who's not appointed.
Mr. Roberts?
So the way I understand it then, so November of 26, have we been a full council, the seats that would have come up then would be the mayor's seat, my seat, whoever is in Jody's seat, because I've kind of lost track of the
Same.
time then, and whoever's in Mike's seat.
Wouldn't that have come up in 2025?
Well,
Would have,
if all of them
but-
get approved.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, can you do that? Since they ran on 3 years, you actually
Yes, the way it was all written and disclosed, both to the electorate and in the ordinances and resolutions. Yes, and yes, the way it was contemplated was whereas normally there would be, I think it was 4 seats on that particular election cycle, we would only be filling 2 or something like that, whatever the math was. And again, forgive me, I've not looked at it in its specifics, but that was, and I think I've made a joke about this in the past, I had to beautiful mind it on the whiteboard in Kyle's office to make it all make sense, but yes, that was how we phased it.
Okay, now, her and
You're good.
no, when would that cycle come? That would come up in 28?
Yes, that's my recollection. Because the way if everything is approved by the voters, you're going to be on federal election cycles, so you'd be on the presidential, and you would not quite kick in for this
I
one.
just didn't know
But it'd be the
that,
the midterms, and then the next presidential election, the midterms, and the next presidential
I
election.
just didn't know if it was lawful to, if you ran on a 3-year term, was elected to a 3-year term.
Well, and we had an extensive discussion.
I understand that, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, I didn't know you could actually get a year.
Well, the voters are giving you, whatever time you're getting from the voters, you're
I
not getting by
understand, yeah,
fiat.
okay.
So that's the voters specifically are approving your term of office. And that was one of the concerns with this, was you're running, and you will not know until election day when your term is, and that was one of the challenges. And
We
we
get like an additional 6 months by going to November of 28 as opposed
So
to
you're
March
actually
of
like
28.
a year and 6, 8
Right,
months.
because instead of 3 years, a 4-year plus.
And that's why, at the risk of confusing everybody, this week I will send you a summary once we know what is what from the voters, because all of this is very academic until we know precisely what happens.
Well, this is my recommendation. Don't have to agree with it. I'm open to everyone's opinion, but having an even number of council members is a mistake. We don't have, right now we have 2 candidates or 2 nominees, and we might get a third. I don't like just, okay, everyone showed up, and because you're here, let's vote you in. I think the goal, I believe everyone is in agreement with the 5 council members. As a council, if we can say, let's pick one, let's pick the very best, if we run on 5 until everything changes over, and then it's a natural cycle. I think that would, it'd serve our city better, and we would have less potential for problems. Thoughts?
Well, we're eliminating, if Charter 2 gets passed, we're eliminating the word quorum. So only one person shows up in the council. Is that correct?
If all of the charter measures pass, this specifically contemplates that 3 members shall constitute a quorum, and you need a majority vote of the seated council to approve a
But
measure.
I thought we were eliminating the word quorum.
I don't remember the precise phrasing of it, but
Majority.
it may be a majority, but whether or not we eliminate the word quorum as a matter of parliamentary procedure, quorum is always an issue.
Right.
Yeah, I've got the ballot, if that
So
helps.
quorum is 3, 5.
Yeah, but if you eliminate the word, and only one shows up.
I appreciate it, it's just,
Yeah.
because the ballot language is less than what the ballot language is
Yeah, that's
75
right.
words, the resolution has all the actual,
What
it has all the actual.
though, I believe, with regards to whose seat it is, based on when that seat comes up for an election.
Well, I don't think that's a problem now that you just explained it.
Well,
He just told you you're 27/7.
No, 6.
I'm
6,
sorry.
6. Yeah. And then there's got to be, there would, theoretically, if we had the full 7, there would be 2 other seats that would come on the 26th as well. Jody and Mike's. And Jody and Mike's seats are tied to other people. I'm lost track.
Yeah, my concern is as we continue this dialogue, not only will we serve to confuse
Yeah.
ourselves with the electorate, ultimately it's your discussion, but I think how we proceed to fill and do anything would probably be best served once we know how it works.
Okay, well, we'll continue this conversation later then. Any other general business? No? Would anyone like to go home?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Great job, everyone.
Excellent. Yeah.